Welcome to Rise from the Ashes, the podcast channel website that focuses on legal matters that may affect you and your family. On the program, we'll be talking with attorneys, mediators, counselors, and other family law professionals who understand the need to assist families and individuals in resolving the personal and legal issues they may be facing. Rise from the Ashes is sponsored by Mundall Law, who specializes in assisting families and individuals through the legal process with respect, dignity, and caring. Mundall Law is dedicated to helping people to solve their legal problems. You can visit the Mundall Law website at mundalllaw.com or call to schedule a consultation with one of their qualified family law attorneys. Please keep in mind that this podcast is intended only to inform and to assist in understanding legal and personal issues as they relate to family law. It should never be considered as a replacement for a qualified family law attorney. When in doubt, please contact a professional. Rise from the Ashes, focusing on matters of the family because family matters. Hi, and welcome to our podcast, Rise from the Ashes. I'm David Braddock. I'll be your host for this program, and we're talking today with Susan Mundall. Susan, of course, is the principal attorney at Mundall Law, a family law firm. Susan, today we're going to be talking about divorce and the grief process. Why do you think that's important?
Divorces actually can be quite easy if parties could see it as a business transaction. It is actually this element of emotions, human emotions, that get in the way of us being able to have what we call a good divorce. And so it is imperative that we talk about the grief cycle and where parties are at, because in most cases, a husband may be in a totally different place than wife in the grief cycle and in the grief process, and it will affect the outcome and even the process of going through the divorce.
Talk a little bit about just what is the essence of grief. It's kind of that you're letting something go. I mean, oftentimes it's when a person passes away is normally when we think that we're grieving, but in this case it's a divorce. How does that make a difference?
Well, it was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross that actually defined the 5 stages. And some will say there's 7 stages, and so there's folks who've done more on it, but she was talking about death. But as we know, we go through grief anytime we have a major event in our life, whether it's something positive like a new job or a new move, or whether it's something potentially negative like a divorce or loss of a loved one, because in some ways divorce is a loss of a loved one. And it's certainly a loss of what we thought our love relationship and what it was going to be.
So the 5 stages, as they're normally listed, and this must be what Kubler-Ross had come up with, starting with denial, and then anger, and then bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. Shall we just talk through those, how they work out with the divorce process?
Let's look at a couple, and as I said, they're in different stages. Most people who come to see an attorney are in acceptance if they're the ones who want the divorce, because they've already worked through all these various stages, and they're like, okay, I'm ready to go. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, they have not had a conversation with their spouse. Their spouse, when they get served, if they get served first without having any conversation, they're in denial. They're like, oh no, you don't really mean this. And so they will try and block you being able to move forward with the divorce. They can do that in a number of ways. Their being in denial in some ways gives them the power of don't do anything, and so we have to drag them kicking and screaming through the process.
That's where it sounds like the denial will then develop into actual anger.
Absolutely. Anytime someone feels threatened, and I'm going to say feels threatened with the status quo. You're going along and you're in a very bad marriage. It's not a healthy marriage. I won't say bad, but it's not healthy. The two of you aren't talking. There's communication issues. There's generally money issues, and there may be substance abuse issues or mental illness. And yet you've learned to live with that. Some would say it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. And so there is this fear of moving forward. And what do? Some people go into depression and some people go into anger. Depression is nothing but anger turned inwards. Again, the only effect is that it stops you from moving forward. and you get stuck in that place. And that's where divorces cost an awful lot of money, is people who stay stuck in anger and depression.
Eventually, it seems like since the divorce has to move forward, you've got qualified attorneys on both sides, one would hope. They're trying to move this process towards a courtroom and a judge assisting the couple into ultimately making a decision. Is this where the bargaining aspect comes in?
It certainly is one of the places it can come in, although it can be that the person is bargaining for, can't we keep the marriage together? Oh, now I'll try counseling. Now, oh, you want me to make a change. Okay, if I do that, will you stop the divorce? And so you see the bargaining coming in that way, whereas when you're just negotiating a settlement, yes, that can be a part of bargaining, but that's actually probably closer to acceptance and just seeing it more as the business transaction.
So there are possibilities, it sounds like, with the bargaining, and depending on how effective they are at reconciling, they could potentially get back together.
Absolutely. In fact, we have a program. There's a series of counselors who do what's called reintegration therapy. What they do is they have parties covenant that they'll put the divorce on hold and work on the issues of their marriage. And I certainly applaud those things, because the number one and the only reason that the courts want to hear that parties are getting a divorce is that there's an irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. So I think bargaining is an important step to go through, because you're going to know as you go deeply into it whether it's realistic or not. And if the other person has already moved on, then making all the bargains in the world isn't going to change the fact that the other person wants a divorce.
Moving towards the ultimate acceptance, you did mention depression already, and you also said that that's one of the stages that these folks can get stuck at, and that's when a divorce can become expensive. Can you talk a little bit more about depression and how the dynamics of that play into the divorce process and how people are ultimately going to be able to let go?
Again, depression can be anger turned inwards. So you can get depressed about the fact that you haven't been able to convince your spouse to stay married, to keep the status quo. But what it's really at the heart of it is a fear again of moving forward. It's a fear about where am I going to go, who's going to love me, and those kind of things. That's really at the heart of depression. What you need to do is dig into it. You need to get a good counselor or a personal coach, someone that can help you start looking to the future so that you can answer those questions about, am I lovable, all of those things, all of meeting those fears. And that's what's going to help you move forward. Otherwise, I see people in depression, well, in some ways, it's denial also, and they'll stop reading their mail, and they'll stop responding, and everything will just sort of sit there. They may even take to their beds. So it is very important to know, if you are depressed, it will lift if you get out and move. And the most important thing you can do is to go out, and if you can find something positive to look forward to, start looking forward. That will help it move it along.
Is there an ideal situation that happens when you arrive at the end of a divorce process?
Well, the ideal situation is where both parties recognize that divorce is inevitable, that there is an irretrievable breakdown of their marriage, and they start making plans for the future. And that involves dividing up their property, talking about what is going to be in the best interest of their children, then actually signing the papers so that they can be divorced in an amicable way, as opposed to going through trial. People who go through trial generally have not reached the acceptance stage. That's why trials are so awful and why they hate the results, because once you get to acceptance, then you can start making those agreements that are going to free you to move forward.
Well, and you say the word amicably, especially it seems like when there are children involved, the two parties are going to have to be able to get along with each other just for the continued rearing of those children into their adulthood.
Absolutely. Acceptance is vitally important to help your children move forward, because something I haven't really mentioned here is each of your children are going to be going through the grief cycle also. There's a whole body of literature out there that talk about kids in the grief cycle, and the astute parent and the caring parent is going to look for the signs of these various stages of grief in their children and help them move through it. And that's the point of Kubler-Ross, is that we have to move through these various stages of grief so that we can live a better life. That's the important message here. It is very important, if you're stuck at any one of these stages, get some good help. Lawyers are lousy counselors by and large because they're so expensive. What they care about is the legal process, most of them. And what you really need to be thinking about yourself and taking care of yourself is identifying where you're at in your grief process and doing what it takes to be able to move forward to acceptance.
From what I understand about the grief process, they don't necessarily happen in order. You'll have various ones that will raise their head at various times. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, when I was teaching the Parenting Through Divorce classes down in Mankato, a therapist actually said that he calls divorce chronic grief because every single time a parent doesn't show up to pick the kids up on time or gets a new lover and has shown them off to the children, all of a sudden you're right back there in anger, and you have to again go through that process of getting to acceptance. You have to accept the fact that there will be new relationships. You have to accept the fact that sometimes a partner is not going to do exactly the right thing with the kids. You need to figure out ways to be able to move forward through that. I do want to say that there is another stage that I discovered actually in my own divorce 30 years ago. That was identified as the stage of ambivalence. That is an important one to go through when you're specifically going through a divorce, is that you used to love this person, and you probably still do love them. And yet these things are happening, so there is this stage of, do I really want to be divorced or don't I? And again, I think the important thing is to get yourself a good counselor or coach and work through that with them to make a decision. Do you want to work on the marriage, or do you want to complete the divorce process, knowing really that your relationship is probably going to continue at least as long as you have children together?
We're getting close to the closure on this topic for this podcast. What do you think is the bottom line when it comes to the grief process as it relates to divorce?
I think the most important thing is recognize that we all go through stages of grief when we are in a divorce. That includes husbands, wives, children. That it is very important that we acknowledge where we're at and that we take care of ourselves. If it is seeing a counselor, if it is getting involved in a divorce care group, if it is getting our children in counseling, those are the things we need to recognize and to be kind to ourselves through that process. I also think it's really important to get a good family law attorney that understands about the stages of grief, and that you can have an open discussion about that and about how it's affecting your ability to either speed up the divorce or slow down the divorce. Because, as I said before, the best way your divorce should end is with both parties at a stage of acceptance and looking forward to new lives, in separate lives, but recognizing that instead of breaking up the family, you now have two separate family units. Or if you don't have children, it is just simply going into a new life yourself.
Thank you so much for all your valuable insights today, Susan.
You bet, David. Thank you. Always a pleasure.
You are listening to Rise from the Ashes, the podcast channel that takes a careful look at all things having to do with legal procedure within the family law process. Rise from the Ashes is sponsored by Mundahl Law, who specializes in assisting families and individuals through the legal process with respect, dignity, and caring. Mundahl Law is dedicated to helping people to solve their legal problems. You can visit the Mundahl Law website at mundahllaw.com or call to schedule a consultation with one of their qualified family law attorneys. Rise from the Ashes, focusing on matters of the family, because family matters.